We've come to the point of the business requirements document where we have to specifically document how our users or customers will experience our strategic initiative. And remember, the purpose of the business requirements document is to communicate to your development team in sufficient enough detail what your customer and user expects to experience so that they can then develop the technical requirements document. And also recall that the development team is expansive in nature. It's not just those who develop the software or design the hardware, but it will include the key business functions who have to design key business processes in order to support your strategic initiative. What we've done so far is we've talked to our customers or users and understand their needs, and we've understand their needs from the standpoint of the Kano model. And we've talked about basic or expected needs, performance needs, which are the needs that the users or customers can clearly articulate, and the excitement needs, those unknown wows that you're going to actually embed into your strategic initiative to give your customers or users something that they've not expected to see. And from that, we will define the critical customer requirements. And these critical customer requirements are the job to be done that your customer or users hire your strategic initiative to do, and the outcome expectations that they expect to see. We will also need to incorporate the supply chain in this process, because if you recall, our development team is not just the people who develop the software or design the hardware associated with our strategic initiative, but the key business functions are involved in order to develop processes that overall support our strategic initiative. In our business requirements, we will describe what the user or customer experiences and how they'll use our strategic initiative in a series of use cases. And a use case specifically represents how the customer or user interacts with each feature and function that we've described in our strategic initiative, and includes both the functional and non-functional requirements. Both of those will come to life in the use case. So what makes a good use case? And we'll talk about each one of these in more detail. But first, you must identify a role. Then you need to focus on the behaviors, the specific actions that your user or customer will experience. And then the results. What benefit will your users or customers derive from each aspect of your strategic initiative as defined by the use case? And it'll describe the acceptance criteria. What does good look like? You'd want to describe alternative flows. And here you would describe what this aspect of your strategic initiative were to do, what the user or customer experience will be should something unexpected happen. You want to actually take your use cases and subdivide those into modules, and you want to present the information that you're trying to convey to your technical team in a visual format, because oftentimes it's easier to show rather than tell what you're trying to accomplish. We are going to begin each use case with something we're going to borrow from the Agile methodology, and that is a user story. A user story is a single sentence, and it provides an overall context to what the use case is trying to convey and accomplish. And it goes something like this. As a blank, I want to blank in order to blank. And let me take a moment here to fill in each of those blanks. So the first blank, as a, and here you want to identify the specific role, identify the specific customer segment or user group that this particular use case relates to. The next blank, I want to, here you want to describe the specific behavior, the action that you want that role to engage in. And then the third blank is in order to, and here you want to describe the results. What outcome should the user or customer, when they perform this particular action, what should they see? Business requirements in terms of the Agile methodology is nothing but a series of user stories that roll up to a single item called an epic. And an epic is a summary level of all the user stories that are in the business requirements. but we're going to do a little bit more detail than what would be prescribed in the Agile methodology. So here's an example of a user story. As a teacher, which I am, I want to access student submissions. So that is the action that I want to achieve in order to grade and provide feedback. That's the result that I expect to see. This user story is a single sentence, concise but complete, that gives the development team the overall context of what this particular use case is trying to accomplish. So now what we're going to do is we're going to break down the use case into its component parts. We're going to begin with the role, and it's a good place to begin. And each use case needs to identify the role in which this particular use case pertains to. Some use cases, you can imagine, apply to every kind of user or customer that will actually use your strategic initiative. And here you simply want to state that this particular use case applies to everyone. But then there might be use cases that will apply to the specific market segment or user group. We talked about in a previous lecture about our example about the medical application. There might be specific use cases that associate with 20-somethings, other use cases that pertain to families, and then yet perhaps a third set of use cases that pertain to retirees. Each one of these particular customer segments or user groups might have a different experience and view or use your particular strategic initiative in a different way. The next element that every use case needs to describe are the specific behaviors associated with that particular element of your strategic initiative. And this means that we want to define the user experience. We take that I want to part of the user story and break it down into the specific actions, which are the functional requirements, and we also want to actually describe the specific experiences that our customers or users will experience, and those are likely to be the non-functional requirements. Together, what we want to do is describe what does the customer or user do and how do they do it. We also need to focus on the results. We want to be able to define for our technical team what the job to be done is for our users or customers and describe that in terms of outcome expectations. Each use case also needs to describe the acceptance criteria. And here what we need to do is describe in detail what good looks like for our users or our customers. There might be an emphasis on this particular aspect of the use case on the non-functional requirements. We need to make sure that we capture all the functional requirements that actually define a good user experience. Each use case must also describe the alternative flows. Oftentimes, users or customers do things that we don't expect. And when they do, we need to describe what will happen. What will our strategic initiative do in response to some sort of unexpected input or action? For example, back to our medical application. If I put in a date that occurred in the past, the user should experience some sort of notification that indicates that they, in fact, inputted an erroneous date. What we need to do is account for what will happen when users don't do what we expect them to do. A good use case may not rely on words alone. It's important to remember that what we're trying to do is communicate to our technical team, to those people that are going to be developing our software, designing our hardware, designing the processes associated with the underlying business processes that need to support our strategic initiative, that they can clearly understand what we're trying to accomplish and what each use case is trying to accomplish. So presenting what our expectations are visually can help communicate to the development team what we're trying to get after. Good use cases could include process flows, which describe how users would interact with our strategic initiative and describe in some detail what we would generally expect the flow of information might be. The other thing is to present diagrams of what we might expect our strategic initiative to look like. So as it relates to each element of the strategic initiative as described by the use case, incorporating diagrams that either identify the process flow or visually what our expectations are in terms of what things look like is always a good thing to do. Organization of our use cases is important to help out our development team as well. We want to make sure that this section of our business requirements document is ordered in an appropriate way that makes sense to the development team. You want to group your use cases into modules that relate to one another so that your use cases that are of similar nature or perform similar things are in your document together. And as an example, let's go back to our medical application. You would want to group use cases that relate to appointments together. Likewise, those use cases that relate to prescriptions would go together as well. Use cases associated with the payment functionality in your strategic initiative would go together. And then if you have the ability to interact with your healthcare provider, if that's one of the aspects of your strategic initiative, the use cases associated with that aspect of your strategic initiative should be grouped together as well. So now what you want to do is put together all these elements of what makes a good use case in a concise description that conveys to your development team what this use case is trying to accomplish. We begin with the use case name and that brief user story, that single sentence that provides the development team the overall context for this particular use case. You then want to describe the user experience in sufficient enough detail so that the development team can understand what the user would do. And this is where you break down all the specific actions, which include both the functional and non-functional requirements that are important to your users and to your customers. And this would be a good place to insert your process flows and your diagrams to describe to the development team what your expectations are in a visual format. You then want to describe for your development team the outcome expectations. What are the results that your user or customer will expect to see? And then take an opportunity to describe in detail the acceptance criteria. Paint a picture for your development team of what good looks like. And then finally wrap up your use case with the alternative flows. Describe what would happen should the user or customer do something unexpected. What would this aspect of your strategic initiative do if in fact an unexpected event were to occur? There you have it. There is how you would define in detail the business requirements to your development team, and this would be the final section of your business requirements document.